Welcome everyone back to Pommy and Oz. Hope we're all doing well. We've got the dreaded lurgy in our house, unfortunately. The elders have come down with it. So far, I am sticking out of it, but work continues, does it not? And we're doing the review of the 2022 season. And what can you say? And I think what we should do is, before we go into this, is we should talk a little bit about the definition of success. And I think there is an absolute great quote, and I have this on my desk at work, from Winnie Churchill, probably one of the more inspirational human beings that has graced this wonderful rock that oscillates the sun. Success is going from failure to failure without a loss of enthusiasm. And I think that is a big quote in which I try and lead my life by. Definitely so. I think it is so important that, when you do anything in life, you've got to regardless of the outcome, you've got to keep that vigor. And if you've got that high vigor and that high energy, you will be fine. We ended the year last year 13th. Do you know what I mean? Percentage of 88.5. There was massive flaws in the game plan. I remember that this time last year, there was an article made on the AFL ratings about the job that Voss has to do and the state of Carlton's list with the acquisitions that were expected. Two of the big key cornerstones there was contested possession differential, which was -7 for Carlton, and also tackles inside 50. And this year, in fairness to Carlton, they are two areas that, are massively improved for Carlton. If we look at Carlton's inside 50 count tackles last year, you were looking at 8.1. And this year, do you know what I mean? They have absolutely flown out of the box, 11.1, which is second in the AFL ladder. And the differentials, which is huge, is a huge improvement for Carlton. 12.9, second in the comp, which makes sense when you look at the personnel. Last year, like I say, -17.3. And that was a huge thing for Carlton. They're two areas. And I don't think anyone can argue that 2022 Carlton do certainly have a brand, an identifiable brand, which is what we're talking last year. And I think one of the things that I'm looking at this year is the myriad of change. We know 8-2 probably one of our highlights of this year when Carlton amazingly in round 10 usurped Sydney, who at the time were one of the favourites to win the flag. I remember that round 9 there was an article with Sydney the dark horses, and Carlton did that without a large contingent, and that has kind of been the history of the year, hasn't it? It's staggering when you think of it, that only of the 40 players used, only 8% of the list has made the whole year. 3 players, that is. And that is absolutely insane in itself, I find. When you're talking about Carlton, 3 players have managed to survive the season, do you know what I mean, barring injuries. And that is absolutely crazy. Doherty and Curnow being 2 of them, 2 guys that for the last probably 5 years, you can probably guarantee aren't going to play the full year. Outside of that, you see the continuity drops, do you know what I mean? And Carlton did miss key personnel, particularly in game, which did knock them back a bit. Now, that is not an excuse. The big change in the second half of the year definitely was defensive running. That was something that we saw at the start of the year. We talked about them lines. We talked about how the defence helped the midfield out. The midfield really got far forward and really looked to enact the pressure. And we found definitely little glimpses in the first half of the season where sometimes that didn't quite work. Gold Coast would be a great example. Hawthorn in the second half, a great example. And it slowly crept into the game. And then when obviously the outcome was at stake in them last games, Carlton did really struggle. And we saw a massive change in the side towards the end of the year. From 8-2, they ended up 8-2 the other way to finish the year. And the defensive running was huge. And that is kind of intent, but it's also a massive part of being brave. And that's something that they did at the start. Carlton really were good at really taking away the pressure at times. They are the number one side in the comp for taking away the short option and offloads against. The problem was the space in behind, and at times it became disjointed. Great example would be in the fourth quarter against Collingwood that you saw Motlop would enact the pressure right at the source, but Durden and Owens would hang back, creating pockets of space in behind. And again, that transition defense being a weakness. And it is almost there. And I think that is what's killer for Carlton. And that's something that comes definitely with maturity. There is a lot of positives this season, but you can call it a success because the 8 was the end game. And it's all how they respond from this. To know that so close, but also so far. Remember, 18th and 9th are the same thing in September. You don't play it. It's about being hungry and enacting that. And Carlton will look back at this season and there'll be a lot of if-onlys, a lot of what-ifs. And a lot of players will look at themselves and probably see the mistakes they made. The improvement of being one of the number one clearance sides in the competition at stopping opposition clearances, but then themselves not dominating in clearances. Carlton were tough to get it out of the centre, but very hard. The fact that Carlton were one of the easiest sides to play in the second half of the year. The unforced errors was top 5 against in Carlton at the start of the year. Now bottom 5. Massive change arounds there. Carlton will also look that they were going really well for tackles and then they failed. But they're them little things that Carlton can iron out. Now, is that with this list? I don't know. I think that when I look at this list, I do think that if you added a Gunston up forward, there is no natural leaders in that forward line. And that's no disrespect to Curnow and Harry and Durden and Owens and Jesus and Jack Martin and all the core that we've flown through there. I just think they lack a little bit of discipline, and it all starts in that forward half. There was a thing that me and Paolo said that you can look at Carlton's inside 50 tackle count and say if they win or not. And the last game of the year is a real good eye-opener for that. You watch Carlton there and you're like, Jesus, they really, really did absolutely nail it because Carlton dominated that one with 15-3. But then you look at them, they were desperation tackles and they weren't being followed up. And that is the huge thing. The ability to enact as a team game. And Vossi is a huge advocate of team defense, team offense. And we saw in the back half of the year, when them cogs don't all work together as an 18 on the field at one time, it is very susceptible to being beaten. And that is something that Voss will have to bring in. Blake Acres does shore up that ability to spread. That was an issue we saw in the back half of the year, particularly against St Kilda, particularly against Adelaide, and particularly against Geelong. That Carlton really did struggle with any form of spread and any form of being able to enact it themselves. They become way too centre-focused. And I do think that that's a huge thing. When you look at Carlton, that they are a very contested side, but what really worked in the first couple of years was the ability to enact that, getting it away from the contest, getting it out. And Carlton have obviously been horrifically caused by injuries, had to change that personnel. But the big thing is that their bash and crash at the start of the year, which really destroyed around stoppages, particularly around clearances, kind of filtered away as Carlton started to get under more pressure. And the missed tackle count in the last half of the year is one of the worst in the AFL. And these are just little disciplined areas that Carlton could do. All in all, it is a huge improved season, and you have to celebrate that into an aspect. You have to praise where credit is due, but you've also got to understand that you've missed your target, which was the top 8, and that's cool. That's really good. This is my line of work. That's really cool when you improve, but you don't hit your target, because there's a lot to celebrate there. But then it's about understanding why you didn't. Because that would say to me there's another layer. And then once you make the 8, there's another layer to get top 4. And then once you make the 8, there's another layer to win the bloody thing. So I think here on in, my thoughts before we get into the trade and the draft strategy is really seeing this season internally as you did make the 8. So you go on to the next stage of being a top 4 side. And disregarding the 8 thing. And that's how I think centre focus, they've got to look at it and go, right, okay, mentally we made the 8, right? But the next plan was the top 4. So we're going to now work this off season on skipping one run because we were oh so close. And with the personnel Carlton have got on hand, they can do. I think you added Jack Gunston. Do I think Blake Acres is the answer? I don't think he's an A-grade like superstar, but I think he's incredibly solid. And he's just that next tier below your Ed Langdons and your Carl Amons and your Josh Dacoses and Hugh McLuggages of how they've performed. I think he's that next layer, and with the right personnel around him, and if Carlton do use that wing, which is what they were woeful at in the second half of the year, the return of the panic long ball, the clearing the lines, where we saw at the start of the year, and it's amazing how Carlton have kept their disposal numbers so high, was that ability to hit and run and stun. And that kind of went away. And I think Blake Acres will suit that because he's a huge upgrade of Jack Noons, who was very reliable, but he's a better user. He's a better footballer. And I think that increases it. And then I think if Carlton just look at that back line, Caleb Marchbank and McGovern looks really good and it looks really sorted with Z Will there. Just adds them layers, doesn't it? It really does. But if I was for Austin, I would be looking for another high half forward, definitely looking for that experience. Jack Gunston fits the bill for me. Natural winner, one of the enforcers in the Clarkson era. Very young then, but he was very, very leadership. And I've met the bloke. He's a very, very astute learner. Blake Acres on the wing, I think that makes it. And then I think, obviously, with the PeterV Injuries, that is the big question for me in the off-season. Do Carlton look at Lloyd? Do they look at Russell? Because for me, a redoing of the PCL and being playing, and it was obvious PeterV wasn't right. They're them little things that when you struggle, they really do knock you for 6. But all in all, yes, we failed at our target. The season is a success. For me, the guy that definitely will take out Pom's BNF this year, without a shadow of a doubt, is Patrick Cripps. I think he's absolutely been brilliant throughout the year. I think we saw this he's the second leading goal kicker who's played predominantly midfield this year. I think he's added that to his game. I think he's been hungry. I think Saad would be second for me. He's been absolutely phenomenal throughout it. And then third, Charlie Curnow. I think Charlie Curnow has been wonderful. Carlton really have to look at that now, though, that they've had 5 people nominated for All-Australian, 2 leading goal kickers this year, one of the leading midfield goal kickers, and they're still not 8, which says to me that if you've got 5 guys nominated for All-Australian, potentially 7 in that team, what's the 15 around them blokes? That 15 needs to get better. And I don't think it's about getting all-stars. I think it's about getting workhorses, harder workers. We saw how terrific Kennedy was. Carlton have 0 wins with Kennedy not in the side. I think there's a reason for that. Because I don't think Kennedy's a superstar. I think he's a battler. And I think Carlton need a lot more battlers in that side, particularly in the forward half of the ground. I think they go way too defensive. The fact we've converted Durden into a more defensive forward and we're taking away from his craft. The fact you see Motlop really enacting them high pressure numbers. And if he played the whole year, he would have trumped always is a big thing. So I think moving forward, maybe Carlton need to look at the proper model. 1 defensive forward who enacts the pressure, then put 2 skillful smalls around him. And seeing Jesus return to the high half forward will be a huge encouragement for me. The future's bright, and when this side gets fit, that's a huge thing. But that's something the list management needs to look after this year, because that second 22, they're very unreliable, particularly from a fitness stakes, which has got them in a lot of strife this year. Would have been interesting to see if they'd played their full 22, because we saw it, twice this year. That is something that I want to see. Another pre-season, the jury's still out for mine. There's a lot of positives we've got to keep open. That's my season review, all in all. Highlights being that, some questionable losses. Gold Coast, Adelaide, St Kilda. I will have sleepless nights knowing how they lost that. Moving forward, there's a lot to like, but now it's serious. Now it's about ironing out them weaknesses, and that is what we must demand as a fan base, because it's that close. It's that close. And this game, you've got to remember, this time next year, All the sides around us will slightly improve as well. So we've got to go 1 jump, 2 jumps, and I want the 3rd jump. I want the usurping jump. And it's not that hard. You've only got to look at Collingwood to see if you get a little bit fortunate with injuries, the game plan does stack up. And ours is a lot more offensive, but a lot structurally sounder than Collingwood. So I'm remaining confident, and I can't wait to cover the off-season with you. Rest of the week, we're going to have a VFL wrap. We'll have the previews for the finals as well. Obviously, me and Faz will be live multiple times this week. Thank you very much for joining me. Just a quick, heartfelt thank you to all of you. We hit 2,700. We have come probably shy of the 3,000. It was a big thing, but that was really, really the heartfelt love that I felt this year from you guys and girls. Absolute privilege to make content for you. And honestly, I love you all. And we'll definitely have to arrange a Pommy and Oz meetup in the off-season. I'd love to get to see some of you, share some laughs, have some hugs, have a bit of banter. Till next time, at your service, Pom out.